The train groaned as it slowed, metal wheels screeching against steel, sending sparks glittering briefly in the cold morning light. Inside the wooden rail cars, the men sensed the shift in motion. Their bodies swayed, their breathing tightened, and silence spread from soldier to soldier like a held breath. They had crossed an ocean in darkness, their futures sealed not by command but by surrender. As the train neared its final stop, they were about to step into the unknown. They were no longer the proud, sharp-edged soldiers of the early war years. Many were older, gray at the temples, shoulders stooped, their skin weathered by years of labor long before uniforms replaced work clothes. They came from farms, workshops, classrooms, and small-town bakeries. Once fathers, husbands, and uncles seated at dinner tables, they had been remade by war into prisoners, stripped of direction, and protected only by fading memories of home. Among them was Wilhelm Krauss, 61, once the owner of an apple orchard near Kassel. 3 years of rationing, bombings, and devastating news had hollowed him out, yet he stood with a straight back, out of habit more than conviction. German propaganda had promised that capture by Americans meant humiliation, starvation, and punishment for every ruined city and fallen Allied soldier. Wilhelm had repeated those warnings to younger men, not because he wanted to believe them, but because expecting cruelty felt safer than hoping for mercy. When the doors slid open, cold sunlight flooded the rail car, bleaching the air. The prisoners blinked and flinched, bracing for shouts or rifle butts, but none came. Instead, American soldiers stood in neat rows, uniforms clean, boots polished, rifles held firmly but not menacingly. One young guard, no older than 20, stepped forward and spoke in halting German. The prisoners were to disembark slowly. There would be no striking, no shouting, no chaos. The tone was firm, procedural, almost bored. The prisoners climbed down, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The landscape stretched wide, open fields, winter-bare trees, a pale, enormous sky. Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, though it scarcely mattered. The air was clean in a way Europe no longer remembered. Ahead lay a camp of wooden barracks, barbed wire fences, and watchtowers, organized rather than brutal, functional rather than haphazard. Wilhelm's gaze lingered on the guards. Their expressions were unreadable, professional, neither friendly nor hostile. He thought of his eldest son, Hans, frozen somewhere outside Stalingrad, and the grief pressed gently, endlessly. At the registration area, names were recorded, ages listed, occupations noted. Some men answered stiffly, trying to preserve dignity. Others spoke softly, ashamed to still be alive. Identity now depended on memory and the legitimacy of paperwork stored across an ocean. Yet the process was calm, efficient, almost courteous. No blows, no mockery, just formality. Then came something unexpected, the smell of warm food, rich and real, not the thin bitterness of survival rations. Meat, vegetables, fresh bread. Confusion, suspicion, even alarm passed between the older prisoners. Led into the mess hall, they found long tables, tin cups, trays stacked neatly. The room was plain but immaculately clean. A fellow prisoner ladled thick stew into bowls, chunks of beef and vegetables, large enough to see. Bread rested in soft loaves, and coffee, actual coffee, filled metal pitchers. At first, no one moved. Finally, a guard nodded once. They could eat. The older men tasted each bite reverently. Wilhelm lifted his bread, warm in his hands, and took a bite, his eyes stinging unexpectedly. Across from him, Otto Uber, 59, once a schoolteacher, let out a thin laugh, half disbelief, half relief. "We were told we would starve," he whispered. Wilhelm nodded, and they ate slowly, reverently, while younger prisoners devoured food too quickly and coughed in embarrassment. Hunger had become a language all understood. The guards stood at the back, talking quietly among themselves. One leaned against a post, sipping coffee, posture relaxed, but not triumphant. The prisoners watched, unable to comprehend such casualness in a world still at war. After the meal, they lingered, uncertain if conversation was allowed. Slowly the room began to sound like men, not prisoners. Near the exit, a bulletin board listed work assignments, mail schedules, and recreation hours. The idea of structured days felt strange, civilized after years where time belonged only to fear. A few men spoke softly of home, of orchards unharvested and workshops left locked. Their words felt fragile, like objects handled after long neglect. No one mentioned victory. The war was still present, but its grip had loosened enough for memory to return cautiously, like a hand reaching out of darkness. Later, they were assembled outside. The commandant, a middle-aged officer with a calm voice, explained the camp's rules. They would work in fields, mills, or workshops, be paid in tokens, receive medical care, write letters home through the Red Cross, and be treated according to the Geneva Convention. The day was not what any of them had prepared for, and disbelief held firm. Men who had lived for years in fear could not shed it in an afternoon. Wilhelm stood quietly as orders concluded, feeling something subtle shift inside him. Not trust, hope, or gratitude, something smaller, more powerful, curiosity. A door creaked open in his mind, long sealed. What if the enemy was not who he had been told? The wind carried the scent of grass, earth, and cooking fires. A guard walking past adjusted his cap and gave Wilhelm a brief nod, a gesture shared simply by two men occupying the same moment in time. Wilhelm did not return it, not because he refused, but because he did not yet know how. He looked toward the endless stretch of fields beyond the fence and felt something unsettling, the beginning of a question, one whose answer he did not yet know. Work in the orchard settled naturally. Wilhelm's hands remembered the labor instinctively. Otto worked carefully, though slowly. And Matthias, inexperienced, mimicked their movements with deliberate focus. Thomas Miller, the farmer who oversaw the work, spoke little, but offered nods of acknowledgement, small gestures of respect and understanding. Meals became shared moments, simple yet nourishing. Bread and stew, water drawn from a jug, even cornbread brought by Thomas's wife, all tasted like life restored. Music filtered through the camp, first from a radio, then from a guard's harmonica, offering melodies that had no allegiance, only memory, only quiet beauty. Slowly, prisoners began to respond, gestures of trust forming in small, wordless exchanges. Tensions remained. Some prisoners, loyal to the ideology they had been taught, whispered warnings of American deceit, insisting kindness was a trap. Dear Capel, a former sergeant, patrolled the barracks with narrow eyes, convinced that any softness betrayed the motherland. Yet Wilhelm endured, having already buried his grief and honor in the snow with his son. One evening, Dear confronted him. Wilhelm's response was quiet, calm. I have not forgotten. I remember everything. That is why I no longer need to hate. The words reverberated like a bell. Weeks passed, and a letter finally arrived. Wilhelm learned that his wife had survived, that their house still stood, though the orchard was lost. The news did not bring tears, only stillness, a recognition that life persisted. As the war in Europe ended, announcements arrived quietly, a simple sheet of paper pinned to a bulletin board. Germany had surrendered. The men who read it did not cheer. They simply stood, catching their breath after years suspended in uncertainty. Repatriation would take time, yet the orchard work continued, blossoms swelling on the trees, proof that life moved forward whether men agreed or not. When Wilhelm finally returned home, the landscape had changed. The orchard was overgrown, the soil tangled with weeds, yet the house remained, a testament to endurance. Reunited with his wife, they did not need to speak immediately. Words would come later. In the evenings, Wilhelm tended the orchard, pruning branches, shaping limbs, cultivating patience and continuity. He understood that life could continue without forgetting, that memory could be carried with gentleness. Season by season, the orchard waited, and so did he, quietly, steadily, alive.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.